25 years ago, I said yes to church planting. There was so much I didn't know, and even more I didn't have the character, competence, or capacity to do well. But God showed up, and we saw people put their faith in Jesus. We saw Jesus put marriages and families back together. We watched people experience the life they were created for the very first time. It was amazing. And honestly, I was hooked.
That's so great. I grew up in a church planting church. We were highly involved. My dad was the lead pastor. We were highly involved in church planting from an early age in my life. I got to rub shoulders with church planters, with church plant directors who invested a lot of time in me. So in high school, when I decided, I feel like I'm being called into full-time Christian ministry, I really kind of had to feel, I think I'll plant a church one day. And so we did. My wife and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia over 2 decades ago and planted a church outside of Atlanta in a suburb. Did the setup tear down for like 8 years, passed the baton to a teammate to move to Las Vegas and be a part of another church plant there. About a year after I moved, the church we planted in Atlanta actually got a permanent facility, which was awesome for them, but didn't go back and help any of the 8 years of setup and tear down. But in Vegas, we did have our own facility, and that is actually where you and I met. And we have been working side by side in church planting ever since then.
Yes. I am Craig Whitney.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. And we're the team behind Multiplier Project. And we help pastors and churches move from addition to multiplication. But before we get into the Antioch Way, we have to do the check-in. Craig, you do have a mug. What are you drinking today?
So today I have a medium roast from the Beneficio Montebrises farm in Costa Rica. It's got those notes of honey and stone fruit. Like, I know I'm already way over your head. I roasted myself last week, and it's actually pretty good. Pretty good. What about you?
I bet it is good. I'm unfortunately not drinking that. I'm drinking the Mets Fan Special. It's lukewarm. It's from a pod. It tastes like 10th inning disappointment, but it gets the job done. And honestly, the mug is probably the more important piece, the In and Out mug. And that probably tells you a little bit more about me than maybe you care to know.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is that I am the guy from California who has lived in California his whole life, and you're the In and Out fan.
Exactly. Yes. Fell in love when we lived in Vegas. So it all comes back to church planting. But
yeah, it does.
Well,
it does.
We're really here, Craig and I, to sit across the table from you, peer to peer, and talk about how you stop being a Jerusalem church and you start being an Antioch church.
Yeah. I don't know that I'd thought about this much until I started really researching and studying Acts and church planting and realized that we really see these two distinct identities, right? There is the Jerusalem church, and really what I would call the Jerusalem way, which is about growing. And man, if just think about a church plant beginning today, 2026 in America, and the news going out, we had 3,000 baptisms on our opening day. Man, we would celebrate that like crazy.
Absolutely. And that's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. But then there is another way. There's the Antioch way. And Antioch was the first sending church, really the first sending hub. And they didn't ask so much, how do we grow? They asked, who can we send? And they said their very best. I mean, Paul, Barnabas, because their identity as a church was built on sending.
Yeah. And we recognize there's a tension between these two things, right? If you're a pastor of a church, growing is good, right? More baptisms is good. More disciples is good. The issue is we seem to have forgotten how to sort of do the other side, which is the sending piece. And that's, you mentioned that. It's one of the things that you and I also have in common is we both grew up in sending churches. My home church sent missionaries around the world. They sent young people to Bible college. And, it sounds weird to say I just became one of them, but there was sort of that sense. Like there was nothing unique in my church about the fact that I went off to Bible college. It's like everybody did it.
Right.
It was just normal.
Yeah, so true. And I certainly at that point in my life, I didn't know it or understand it. But it was the Antioch church. That's how my church was living out ministry. And you wrote a book, The Antioch Way, to help leaders become one too.
Yeah, I just came to realize that as important and valuable as the Jerusalem church was, even is, as a model for us today, that it was the Antioch church that became the hub for spreading the good news around the world, right? Like if you take the Antioch church out of Acts, what do we have? We have a church in Jerusalem. We don't have a global movement. The global movement began in Antioch. And it's crazy to think, like, how did they do that? Right. Well, they accomplished it with just four things, really. They called leaders from within, they equipped them for mission, they sent them with support, and they celebrated them as family. And those are things, honestly, any church can do.
Yeah. One of the things you and I talk about quite often when we look at the Antioch church, calling leaders from within, is kind of this idea that everyone you need, and really everything you need to at least begin fulfilling your role in the Great Commission, is already in your church. Or as a good friend of mine says, it's already in the house. They're there. But I think a lot of times we don't think about that and we don't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had the privilege of doing what we call a discovery experience at some of the churches that we work with. And it's a Friday night, Saturday experience. They invite people in their church that they see potential in, really that they see church planting potential in. And, it's sort of that, we say like there's church planters in their church and everybody's like, I don't know. But then they invite these people, we come and they're like, oh, you were right. Those people, they could plant a church. Now, we talk a lot about the difference between potential and readiness, right? Most of those people are not ready to go plant a church today. It'd probably be almost, we'd say, foolish to send them today to plant a church. But they're church planters. That's who God made them to be. They're pioneers. They're entrepreneurs. They're apostles, evangelists. And with some equipping, which is part of what happened in Antioch, they can become ready to go and be sent and plant great churches.
Yeah. We think about the value of calling, obviously, when it comes to being sent out. But the reality is what you and I found is a lot of times folks don't even realize they're calling until they're challenged, or somebody has an IC&U conversation, or they go through a discovery experience like we're doing, and it just kind of opens their eyes to bigger things God's doing in their life. Doing the discovery experience, and one of the feedbacks we've gotten from participants is they wish the experience was longer, which we're taking up marketplace leaders most of their weekend, and they wish it was longer. But I think that speaks to there's no downside for tapping people on the shoulder in your church and having a larger conversation about what is God calling them to.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, like who's ever going to be offended or bent out of shape or whatever because someone sits down with them, looks in the eye, and says, you are really great at this. Did you know you could do this, this, and this? How does that conversation really go wrong? It's just even if people don't say yes, they're probably going to feel good about the fact that you saw that in them.
Yeah, that's so good. And, talk about, to be an Antioch church, there's these four things you talked about that we see in the book of Acts in chapter 13. There's, to make those shifts, you need a new operating system. You don't need more programs. There's shifts. We talk about 5 multiplication shifts that we need to make. And one of those we talk about is gathering to sending, and how we measure success by our sending capacity, not our seating capacity.
Yep. And it's a good place to talk about the fact, when we talk about these shifts, it's not that we say you fully exchange one for the other, yes. Right? A church that says, oh, okay, well, we'll send instead of gather. Well, pretty quickly, there won't be anyone to send. Right. They're all gone. You've sent them all. Right. So it's always gathering and sending, but it's a shift of going, hey, everything is about gathering. Everything, instead of everything about how do we get one more person to show up on Sunday, we actually ask the question, hey, how do we send one more person to go? And that's the shift. And that's an operating shift to change your values so that the questions you're asking, the metrics you're keeping, the things that you're measuring of success move from getting one more person to come to getting one more person to go.
So good. Yeah, we talk about like a multiplication scorecard, and you and I never encourage anybody to get rid of the gathering metrics. Those are good metrics.
Probably ought to still count the butts and bucks. That's probably a good idea. And we kind of do care about how many people get baptized.
Exactly. Yes. Those are good things. So it's a both and, but it is a priority. It's a identity shift from gathering to actually sending. So good. Another shift we talk about is what to who. And kind of, again, the same thing as with gathering to sending. The what is not bad. I mean, we tend, as leaders in churches, we're asking always kind of, what should we do? What's next? And you should have those conversations. You should have those meetings. There's a reason for a church calendar, right? And a strategy there. But this shift from what to who is, we're going, hey, you should start prioritizing the question, who is the leader God provided over what should we do? Again, what should we do is good, but begin here with who. Who's the leader God provided?
Yeah, this is a question that I've asked in churches for a long time, even pre starting Multiplier project. Just like, hey, do you have a scouting guide? Do you have a list anywhere of the future leaders? And it is just shocking to me. Even churches that we would we could name, people would know, like these huge, well-known, prominent churches. Like, what's a scouting guide? Like, they got calendars. They can tell you what sermon they're preaching, a year from now. But no one's ever written down the names of the people that are future leaders. And so it's that shift of saying, yeah, we should have a calendar. We should know what we're doing. But man, we should know even more. Who are the people that God is preparing, that God's put in our congregation that could have incredible impact if we would call and equip them and send them.
Yeah, that's so good. And man, when you can get your entire team asking that question, that's a game changer.
Yep.
And we talk about too, like, you think about a calendar and what's next. I mean, programs, events, they're good, but they don't build capacity. Like, they absorb capacity. Yeah. But people, the who, that increases. Yeah, they create capacity. And who doesn't want that?
That's right. That's right. And that really leads into the next shift, which is from delegate to develop, right? And again, as a pastor, you should not be doing everything. Right? There are things that you should be delegating. But so often the focus becomes, let's just get somebody to do this task. I've done this exercise with church planners, just trying to help them realize, why do you need such a big launch team? Well, if you're doing a launch model and you have a Sunday service, it's going to take a minimum of 30 people to put on that Sunday morning. And that's a minimum. Yeah. Bare minimum. Right. Bare. And so that's a lot of delegation that needs to happen. But development is so much more significant. When we develop people, their capacity grows. We develop people into leaders, and now they lead 30 people, and we don't have to lead 30 people anymore. And so just that mindset of not just, how do I get one more task off my plate, but how do I actually invest in people and develop them, really first into who God created them to be, but recognizing that as we do that, our church capacity grows, and I think even more significant, our kingdom capacity grows. Yes. And when you do that, some of those people are going to stay in your church. They're going to be great leaders. They're going to be missionaries in the marketplace. They might become your staff people, but some of those people are going to be gifted as apostles and evangelists, and you're going to realize pretty quickly, God actually made them to be sent, and we need to do that so that they can really do the work that God created them to do.
Yeah. And it's a mindset shift as well, again, to who instead of what, because delegate is focused on task, develop is focused on people. And amazingly, again, they're both good, but when you develop, it takes care of the delegation. Let's face it, we've all delegated plenty. And what happens a lot of times when we delegate, eventually it comes back to us, that task, and we have to delegate it to somebody else. Whereas develop, it doesn't come back. It's not a boomerang. It stays with them, and then they develop others. And it really is that focus on people. And really, I mean, it's discipleship, isn't it? I mean, that's why we got into this work. It's why we were called into this, is to develop others. And you're thinking about what's best for them. And, you and I work with a lot of churches, and in some churches, I mean, there's just staff that, I mean, they could stay in the context of that work. But the reality is the way God wired them, the calling he's put in their life, if they don't need to be there long term. In fact, they're probably going to cause frustration if they are there long term, because God's calling them to somewhere else and to something else. And if you've got a development mindset, you become their friend and you help send them. And instead of throwing a lid on them.
Yeah. That I've kind of jokingly called that the planter pathway myth.
Yeah.
Right. And the planter pathway myth is that great staff people make great church planters. And I can't speak for you. I can speak for myself. I was a terrible staff because I was just made to innovate and to start new things. And so sort of going along with the program was the last thing I wanted to do. When I was young, I wasn't very good at reining that in. So probably didn't set a lot of things that caused more trouble than I needed to. But when I got, out and went to plant, I finally sort of got to leverage those things that God had created in me. And, I've been starting stuff ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads to a fourth shift. And that's the shift from members to missionaries, and specifically from developing church members to actually, again, a shift to equipping missionaries. And this gets to the idea of, I think the folks in our congregation, when they hear the word missionary, because the way we've kind of talked about in the past, they think somebody who's overseas, somebody who's gone a long ways away to tell others about Jesus. But the reality is, to be a sent one, every person in your church is, if they're following Jesus, they are sent. And how far do you really have to go to rub shoulders with someone who needs to know Jesus?
Yeah. Yeah. For most of us, in our American context, it's not any further than across the street. And, maybe you're fortunate you have some people who live across the street from you who are great followers of Jesus. Okay, so now it's 3 houses down the street, right? But it's going to be hard for someone to be able to legitimately say, well, no, I'd have to go to another country to find some people who don't follow Jesus. That's just the nature of what's happened in our context. And I find it fascinating that, again, the churches we grew up in, I grew up in a church that was sending missionaries to Africa and Central and South America and places like the Philippines and Korea. And you look at statistics now and you realize there are more Christians in those places than there are in America. Yeah. Those missionaries did a phenomenally good job. And we need to begin doing just as well in being missionaries in our own context, to our own neighbors, to our own communities, as we were at sending people to those foreign places 50 years ago.
So good. So good. Talk about one of the things at Multiplier Project that we're developing are training activities. And so, we have outlined competencies and behaviors of a missionary.
Yes.
But we believe pretty strongly, there's a place for, book knowledge, reading classes, but we believe very strongly in how do you get good at something? The best way to do it is you do it. And so talk about the training activities and kind of what we're building there.
Yeah. And that's really a philosophy. Knowledge is good. And, certainly, American context, other contexts, Bible college, seminary, you and I have benefited from being in those environments. There's things I learned that I'm certainly grateful for. But man, almost everything I know about doing ministry is sort of, I learned in the school of hard knocks. I learned by just, getting in and doing it. I didn't understand. It's typical that you wouldn't as a high school student. I was probably in my junior year of high school when I was invited into a group of students at our church that, this is, 80s youth group, right? Pizza nights and lock-ins and all this stuff, if you're my age, that you remember. But I was invited to this group to learn how to make disciples. And that's what we were taught. We were taught how to introduce people to Jesus, how to help them grow. And so, here I am, 16, 17 years old, and I'm introducing friends at school to Jesus and, leading Bible studies. That just seemed normal to me.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't realize how unusual that was until, sort of get out and talk to other people. Realize, and then you fast forward, to today, and you and I, have done, worked in church planting for so long, done church planting assessments. I've had that privilege to run some tools and some things and realize, man, there's people saying they want to be a church planter that have never in their lifetime led anyone to faith in Jesus.
Right.
Man, it's going to be hard to be an effective missionary if you don't have any experience doing that. And so what we're creating is really things that I would describe more as a CrossFit gym than a seminary, right? Instead of, hey, read this book, write this paper, it's go do this exercise. And the exercises are things like, go talk to your neighbor, or go have a spiritual conversation, gather people in your home and have a spiritual conversation, and just things that you would almost think are intuitive, but we realize so many people don't have experience doing, and provided in a way, which, kind of be the case if you had a good trainer, that it's not, hey, go run the marathon tomorrow. It's like, hey, let's just get around the block. That's step one. And then let's build on basic skills. And so, very practical, very much, go do the work, talk about it, go try it again, talk about it, go try it again. And as you do, you get better and you realize somewhere down the road, wow, this thing that I couldn't do at all before, I'm now actually competent. I have a new capacity. I have a new ability. And the challenge for us is that those missionary capacities, those missionary competencies aren't things that we naturally learn inside the context of the church. It's sort of by definition, to learn them, you have to get outside of the context of the church. And so we've also got to be good at creating practice fields for people where they can go practice those missionary activities. So that's a big part of what we're doing at Multiply Project.
And the other thing I love about it is you kind of focused on the person with potential, the who. I love it, what we're developing for also the pastor, the staff team, the mentor, because we're putting things in their hands that don't require a ton of prep time for them. It's coaching sheets. It's what are you helping them do? What's the assignment? But then also, what are the questions to ask? How to coach them? How to talk about their experience with that activity and give feedback. It's let's face it. You and I both know, been in ministry, you got plenty on your plate to do. You're not looking to add more to your work week. This doesn't. Like this, seriously, it's like it is in your hands. It is just so helpful. You're probably already having developmental conversations, even if you don't realize it. This gives you tools to take that to a whole another level in really developing missionaries. So good. And
I think especially in, the multiplication church planting world, there's some really high profile churches that have created residencies. We're even in this, podcast season going to talk to some churches that are doing some residency like things. But I think, and as a result, some of these churches have just multiplied in incredible ways. But I think the challenge of that is, if you're listening to this and you're the pastor of a church of 200, 300, 400 people, you're a new church, you're a year old. You look at that and you think, well, that's something we'll do someday. Because, it takes all these resources and money and you need a staff person to run it. And so we sort of think, man, that's great, but I can't do that. And if that's the model, if that's what it requires, you're actually right. You probably don't have the resources to be able to do that. But we sort of forget the fact that, again, sort of development is something that one person can do for another person. That's all it takes. Right. And so that's one of our goals, is to make multiplication possible for a church of a few hundred that really wants to become a sending church. We'll help you do that and give you a way to do it that's doable. You'll probably have to change some priorities. That's part of these shifts. But you won't need to hire a staff person. You won't need $500,000 more in your budget. Need a little bit of time, a little bit of intentionality.
And what happens if 1,000 or 2,000 churches start doing this?
Yes.
It would be incredible. All right. So one last shift we talk about is from planning to praying. You and I joke, we're like, everybody hears this, thinks that should be the first shift. And in so many ways, it is. It is. But the idea, it's Church of Antioch. Like, how did they know who to send? They didn't over strategize this. They didn't make this more difficult than it needed to be. They were literally worshiping and fasting when God pointed out. And so, it's this idea we listen our way to movement rather than just strategizing our way to growth.
Yep. And I think it probably a variety of reasons why we sort of put this here, but I think when you begin to do some of these things, you quickly sort of find yourself in the place and the posture of realizing more planning isn't going to make this work. This only works by prayer. And it is, there's a handful of things that, that Jesus, told us to pray. But this is one of the things that Jesus was very specific about, right? The harvest is plentiful. Pray for more workers. Like it couldn't be any more clear that this kind of prayer, it really isn't optional. It really is a command of Jesus that this is, the way that we should be praying, the kind of prayer that we should be having for the people in our congregation, for our communities, for the kingdom as a whole. And so we think as you begin to walk down this path, that you sort of pretty quickly find yourself in a place of we're going to empower this with prayer, or it's just not going to work.
Yeah, so good. All right, so we're introducing a new podcast today.
Yes.
Let me say one thing, though, because we've just talked about these 5 shifts. Maybe you're listening, you're like, I'd like to unpack those a lot more. We actually are doing 5 shift cohorts, digital cohorts. You can go to our website, click on cohorts, and see when the next cohort's coming up. So this is our podcast. I don't think that's a shameless plug, right? It is our podcast. It's who we are. So yeah, exactly. It's what we do. So if you are interested in that, we do have some spaces for that. But this is really about the podcast.
Yes. And, I am really excited that we're getting to launch this. You and I sort of know because we've the first season's recorded. We've had these conversations and they're just incredible. We get to hear from some names that people like Dave Ferguson from Exponential and Clayton Green from Summit and Yukon Chu from City to City. Like these people and their organizations are the architects of multiplication, sort of in our context, in our time. And they have such incredible wisdom to share. And it's just been an honor to have those conversations with them.
Totally. And we're also going to introduce you to the hidden gems, for maybe lack of a better statement, but pastors in the trenches right now. We're talking to Chandler Minor at the Well in Austin, Texas, who's living out the Antioch model in a way that's totally doable. A church that's 13, 14 years old. We sit down with Randy Deal at Rock Point and Ali Ruhi at Bold Church. Ali's a software engineer who didn't think he was a pastor until his church helped him see he was a multiplier, tapped him on the shoulder.
Yep. And Ollie's story is incredible, and so much in many ways of just kind of a prototype. Like if you're thinking this just is not possible, Ollie kind of breaks the mold and says, "No, this is possible."
yeah, so good.
And they're becoming a multiplying church too, which is pretty cool.
Right. So, yeah, what is Multiply Project? We really created Multiply Project, creating this podcast to be a bridge for our listeners, for folks who are leading churches. We want to give you the content and the connections so your church can multiply with confidence, and that's really key.
Yep. And that's, you and I have that conversation a lot, that there's more conversation about multiplication right now than you and I have ever experienced in decades of ministry. Yet it seems like amidst all of the conversation, there's not nearly the amount of traction, and there's not nearly the amount of movement that there should be for the amount of conversation. And so we have really wanted to come alongside pastors and churches, give you the tools and the resources. So instead of having conversations about multiplication, you can actually start doing multiplication.
Yes. So good. So thinking of a takeaway just from episode 1, because we want you to be a multiplier, not just a builder. And so what's the best takeaway?
Go listen to the first episode, the next episode, I guess this is the first one with Dave Ferguson. We had such a great conversation. I don't know if I should give this away, but probably about halfway through the conversation, Dave is going to start pounding the desk, pounding the table. And when you get there, you'll know it, and you'll see like his genuine passion, vision, and enthusiasm for multiplication and for being a multiplier. And man, that's just so much of the message that we want to communicate is be a multiplier, reclaim the Antioch way. And Dave does such a great job of communicating that.
That's so good. So yeah, listen to the next episode, subscribe to the podcast. I'd encourage you to check out our website as well. And if you don't have a copy yet, my friend Craig Whitney right here wrote a book, The Antioch Way. And
okay, so now we're at the end. So here's the shameless plug, right? I'll actually like
pull it up.
Figure out
there you go.
It, right there it is.
Yes.
One shameless plug before the end of the podcast.
Exactly. Order The Antioch Way and dive in. It'll be a great companion to go along with the podcast. So, no, excited. We'll see you in the next episode.